always knew that some love stories weren't meant to be. But this was mine. The first time I met him, he was just another teacher, young but serious, with those piercing eyes that seemed to see beyond words. The literature classroom had never been a place that stirred so many emotions in me until he arrived. His name was Gabriel. He had a firm voice, the kind that makes you pay attention effortlessly. Each class was an invitation to dive into stories, and I had never felt so much pleasure in learning. But what really caught my attention was the way he spoke about literature, as if each book was a secret that only he knew how to unlock. At first, I just wanted to impress him. I wanted him to see in me something more than just another student. So I started reading more, commenting on debates, challenging his opinions. And to my surprise, he noticed. The first message came from an academic email, a comment on a text I had written for class. Nothing special, but that made my heart race. And then the emails became more frequent, little debates about characters, exchanges of favorite quotes. I lived for those moments, waiting for his response, as if it were the most important event of the day. Until one day, he sent me a book, an old edition, underlined in some places. Inside, a short note. "Read this and tell me what you think. Some stories are more than they seem." That's when I realized that this was more than just literature, and I didn't want to stop. The book he gave me was Wuthering Heights, a curious choice, considering the destructive nature of that love story. I read each page with absurd intensity, trying to find clues, hidden messages, something that would reveal if Gabriel saw in me more than a curious student. The markings intrigued me. In one particular passage, he had underlined, "If he had been mine, I would have loved him and followed the whole world with him." My heart raced. Did that mean anything? Or was I just letting myself be carried away by a dangerous illusion? It took me 2 days to respond. I didn't want to seem anxious, but the truth was that I had already rehearsed my answer at least 10 times before pressing send. "Do you believe that some people are inevitable?" I wrote, taking a risk more than I should have. The answer came quickly. Too quickly. "I believe that some connections are intense enough to change us. Forever." I shivered. He didn't deny it. He didn't dodge it. He only reinforced that game that seemed to grow between us, without either of us having the courage to name it. The emails turned into WhatsApp messages. At first, they were still about books, about classes. But soon, they turned into entire nights, exchanging ideas about life, about things I had never told anyone. He talked about dreams he never realized. I confessed fears that I never had the courage to admit out loud. And then, one night, after a few more casual messages, he asked, "If you could be anywhere right now, where would you be?" I didn't think much before answering, "Where I could hear your voice up close." My heart stopped the moment I pressed send. What had I done? But before panic could take over, his answer came. "Then come." He sent me an address. It wasn't his house, nor a cafe or some public place. It was a city overlook, one of those places where couples hide to make out without being seen. I knew what that meant. I knew the risk. I knew I was crossing a line from which there was no turning back. But I went anyway. My heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my throat when I arrived. He was already there, leaning against the car, his arms crossed, watching me as if he was gauging my reaction. "You came." His voice was low, filled with something I couldn't tell if it was doubt or desire. I couldn't help it. He smirked, as if he already knew that, as if he had always known. We stood there, just staring at each other, the city stretching out silently below us, until he took a step forward, then another. I knew it was wrong. I knew that if anyone saw us there, everything would fall apart. But when he lifted his hand and brushed his fingers against mine, I knew it didn't matter. "Tell me to stop," he murmured, his breath close to mine. But I didn't say anything. I just closed my eyes as his lips touched mine. His lips touched mine, hesitantly at first, then more firmly, as if we had crossed an invisible line from which there was no going back. A shiver ran down my spine as his hands slid to my waist, pulling me closer. The world around us faded away, and all that was left was the taste of him, hot and addictive, mixed with the electricity of what we were doing. He was the one who broke the kiss first, leaning his forehead against mine, breathing deeply as if trying to contain himself. But his fingers were still holding my face, his thumb tracing a slow path across my skin. "This is crazy," he whispered but didn't pull away. "So we're in this madness together." He closed his eyes for a second, as if he was fighting something inside him. And then, as if he had made a decision, his hand slid to the back of my neck, and he kissed me again. This time, there was no hesitation. It was a hungry kiss, as if he wanted to devour me, as if he had repressed this desire for too long. I didn't know how long we stayed there, glued to each other, exchanging kisses and touches that said more than any words could. But eventually, reality caught up with us. He pulled away, his dark eyes fixed on mine. This can't happen again. My chest tightened. I should have expected this, but hearing the words still hurt. "Then tell me you don't want to." He didn't say anything. He just ran his hand through his hair, as if he was frustrated with himself. "This is dangerous," he murmured. "Then why can't we stop?" He stared at me, his eyes scanning every detail of my face, as if he was trying to record every feature. "Because you are the most tempting thing that has ever happened in my life." I shivered, not out of fear, but out of the burning desire that burned between us. "Then let me be." He hesitated for a long moment, and for a second I thought he would just turn away and walk away. But then he took my hand, intertwining our fingers. "Not here." He led me into the car, and for a few minutes we sat in silence, still trying to process what had just happened. I could feel the tension in the air, the desire to keep going, to go further. But there was also the weight of conscience hanging over us. He started the car, and I thought he was going to take me home. But then I realized we were going somewhere else. "Where are we going?" He looked at me, and the gleam in his eyes gave me the answer before he even opened his mouth. "Somewhere where no one can see us." My heart raced. I knew I was about to enter something that would consume me completely. But in that moment, I didn't care. I just wanted more. The car glided down the dark road, the engine purring softly as the city fell away. I should have asked where we were going. I should have worried about the consequences. But all I could feel was the rapid pulse in my chest, and the warmth of his hand still holding mine. I knew we were crossing an invisible boundary, but somehow, that only made it more intense. After a few minutes, I realized we were driving away from the center completely, turning onto a side road that led to a more remote area. My heart was beating like a drum. When we finally stopped, I recognized the place. It was a small country house, far from the city, surrounded by tall trees and darkness. "It's safe here," he said, turning off the car but making no move to move. "No one comes here." My fingers tightened against the fabric of my skirt. The air inside the car felt heavy, thick, as if we were about to cross a point of no return. "So, that's why you brought me here?" My voice came out quieter than I expected. Gabriel let out a long sigh, leaning back against the driver's seat. His gaze turned to me, intense, as if he were studying me. I wanted to convince myself that we could stop, that it was just a kiss. But then you got in my car and... He ran a hand through his hair. "I don't want to stop." My breath caught in my throat. "Then don't stop." For a moment, he stood still, as if processing my words. Then, without hesitation, he opened the door and got out of the car. I followed him. The night was cold, but the tension between us burned like fire. He unlocked the door to the house, and when we entered, I realized that it was a simple but cozy place. It smelled of wood and old books, and the soft light from the lamps created dancing shadows on the walls. I barely had time to take in the environment before he turned to me. "Are you sure?" Instead of answering, I took a step forward, pressing my body against his. I could feel his warm breath against my skin, the woody scent of the perfume that now seemed to permeate me. He held my face between his hands, his fingers gently sliding over my skin. For a second, I thought he was going to kiss me, but he just stood there, watching me, as if he wanted to keep that moment forever. "You're so beautiful," he murmured, his voice full of desire. My heart raced. I wanted more. I wanted to feel his mouth on mine again. I wanted to lose control. I wanted to give myself completely. And then, he finally gave in. The kiss was different from the one at the gazebo. It was more intense, hungrier. My hands grabbed onto his coat, pulling him closer, while his ran over my body with restrained urgency. Every touch of his made me shiver. Every sigh that escaped between our kisses only increased the fire between us. I felt his hands slide around my waist, slowly moving up the fabric of my blouse, exploring, discovering. My entire body was hot, vibrating under his touch. "I want you." My voice came out low, almost a whisper between the kisses. He paused for a moment, his gaze diving into mine. "You have no idea how much I want you." His hand slid down my back, pulling me against him, making me feel every inch of his body. My heart was beating so hard, I could hear it in my ears. And then, without another word, he took me by the hand and led me into the room. I knew that after that night, nothing would ever be the same again, and I didn't want it to be. He closed the door behind us, and for a moment, everything was silent. I could only hear our panting breaths. I felt the heat of my own body mixing with his, as if we were enveloped by something invisible and overwhelming. The dim room was lit only by a discreet lamp next to the bed. The room was simple, without excesses, but at that moment, it seemed like the only place in the world. Gabriel approached slowly, as if he wanted to prolong that moment, as if he wanted to make sure I wouldn't change my mind. But I had already decided. I wanted that. I wanted to feel his skin against mine. I wanted to lose myself in the intensity of his touches. I wanted to belong to that moment. He raised one of his hands and slid his fingers down the side of my face, tracing a slow, provocative line down to my chin. My body reacted immediately to his touch, and when he grabbed the back of my neck and tilted my face up, I already knew what was coming next. The kiss was even more intense than the previous ones. No hesitation, no fear, just pure, undeniable desire. His hands explored my body patiently, sliding over the fabric of my blouse, before pulling it up, exposing my skin to the warm touch of his fingers. My own fingers found their way to the buttons of his shirt, unbuttoning them one by one, feeling the texture of his warm skin beneath my palm. When I finally slid the shirt off his shoulders, I allowed myself to truly look at him. He was beautiful, not just in the obvious sense, but in the way his body seemed sculpted for sin, in the way his dark eyes devoured me, as if I were the only thing that mattered in the universe. "You are perfect," he murmured against my skin, leaving a trail of kisses along my neck, to the curve of my shoulders. A shiver ran down my spine, and I closed my eyes, giving myself completely to the sensation. His hands ran down my body, unbuttoning my pants, sliding them down as he guided me to the bed. My heart was beating wildly, my breath was short, and every part of me yearned for his touch. When we finally fell onto the mattress, everything around us disappeared. Time ceased to exist. The touches, the kisses, the sighs, everything mixed together in a whirlwind of sensations that I had never experienced before. He was gentle, and at the same time intense. He made me feel as if I were precious, as if every movement of his was calculated to make me lose my breath. And I lost myself. I gave myself up without reservations, without fear, without any thought beyond the present. I didn't know desire could be like this. So overwhelming, so complete, so desperately needed. When it was all over, we lay there, our breathing still uneven, our bodies entwined in the warmth of the night. Gabriel slid his fingers down my arm, a loving, almost protective gesture. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice husky and soft. I turned to face him, and a small smile curved my lips. "I've never been better." He pulled me closer, wrapping me in his arms. And for the first time that night, a dangerous thought crept into my mind. I want more, so much more. And there was no turning back. The darkness of the room seemed to envelop us like a well-kept secret. Lying between the messy sheets, we were still catching our breath, our bodies intertwined, warm and sated. His scent was already impregnated on my skin, and I knew, deep in my soul, that something inside me had changed forever. Gabriel slid his fingers slowly down my arm, tracing invisible lines on my skin. His touch was light, but enough to give me goosebumps. "Did you know it would be like this?" he asked, his voice hoarse and low. I turned to the side, resting my head on my hand to look at him better. The dim light from the lamp left soft shadows on his face, highlighting his defined features. "Like what?" He let out a crooked smile. "Like this. Intense, as if nothing else existed beyond that." I took a deep breath, feeling my own chest expand with the emotion those words provoked. "Yes," I confessed. "Since the first day you walked into the classroom." He closed his eyes for a moment, as if he was trying to process it. Then, without warning, he slid his fingers to my waist and pulled me on top of him, making me straddle his lap. I let out a surprised gasp, but didn't protest. Instead, I fit myself against him, feeling every inch of the connection between our bodies. "This is crazy," he murmured, his hands tightening around my waist, holding me steady. "Then tell me to stop." I expected him to say it. I expected him to push me away, to bring me back to my senses. But he didn't say anything. Instead, his dark eyes locked on mine, and the desire I saw there was enough to make me shiver. And then he kissed me again. This time, without any hesitation. It was a kiss that didn't ask for permission, that demanded surrender. My hands slid down his chest, feeling the muscles beneath my skin as his lips trailed down my neck, biting lightly, teasing. My entire body responded instantly, arching against him, seeking more, and he gave it to me. That night wasn't just a surrender, it was a discovery of him, of myself, of what we were together. And when finally desire gave way to exhaustion, I collapsed beside him, my head resting against his chest. We were silent for a long time, just listening to our breathing slow down. Then Gabriel broke the silence. What are we going to do now? The question hung in the air, thick and dangerous. I should tell him that it was a mistake, that we should forget and move on. But I couldn't. Instead, I slowly ran my fingers down his chest, tracing imaginary lines. Let's keep going. He took a deep breath, and for the first time that night, I saw a flicker of concern in his eyes. If they find out, they won't, I interrupted, then added with a mischievous smile, unless you can't resist me in class. Gabriel laughed, shaking his head. You're dangerous, and you love it. He pulled me closer and kissed me again, sealing our decision with the taste of our own doom. In the days that followed, the world seemed to have changed. Classes were no longer just classes. Every time I entered the room and our eyes met, an electric shock ran through my body. Every word he said seemed loaded with a hidden meaning, and as time passed, the tension between us grew. We saw each other whenever we could, in the car, at his apartment, in small, secluded cafes where no one knew us. The danger only made everything more exciting. Until one day, Gabriel appeared in class more serious than usual. His gaze met mine for only an instant, but I knew something was wrong. The bell rang, and I got ready to leave, but he called me before I could reach the door. Stay a little. My classmates passed me, leaving one by one, until we were alone in the room. What's wrong? I asked, trying to ignore the sudden tightness in my chest. Gabriel ran his hands through his hair, a gesture of frustration. Someone's suspicious. My stomach turned. What do you mean? I've heard the teachers say. They're saying I've been paying too much attention to you. My heart raced. And what are we going to do? He hesitated, and in that moment, I knew Gabriel was considering what I feared most. He was thinking about breaking up, but I wasn't ready to let him go. I wanted him, at any cost. The silence between us was suffocating. Gabriel's gaze weighed on me, filled with doubt and guilt, but I refused to accept what he was about to say. This is going too far. His voice was low, strained. We've been reckless enough. I shook my head, refusing to listen. We didn't do anything wrong. You know that's not how the world sees it. He pulled away from me, running his hands through his hair in frustration. I watched him, feeling panic rise inside me. You want to break up? Is that it? He closed his eyes, as if that question hurt him. But he didn't answer, and it was enough to make me feel like the ground had been ripped out from under my feet. I moved closer, taking his face in my hands. I knew that if he looked me in the eyes, I wouldn't be able to say those words. You don't want to stop, I murmured, pressing my body against his. You feel it as much as I do. He took a deep breath, his fingers brushing my waist, as if he were fighting his own desire. It's not about what I want. What if I tell you I can't stay away from you? His gaze met mine, and for an instant, I saw his mask crack. I saw the man who, despite all the rules and risks, still wanted me. Then he kissed me, There was no more caution. There was no more fear. There was only the two of us. Our bodies met in the darkness of the empty room. The touches desperate. The kisses hungry. The world outside could fall apart. But right there, in that moment, he was still mine. And I would do anything to keep it that way. In the following days, Gabriel tried to pull away, but I wouldn't let him. I would tease him in the hallways, exchange furtive glances during class, leave notes hidden in his books. And every time he tried to resist, we ended up giving in to each other even more intensely. We would meet up in secret, in the car, in his apartment, even in a small library in the back of the school, where no one went. It was insane, but it was irresistible, until one day, everything fell apart. I knew something was wrong as soon as I got to school. The looks on me, the whispers in the hallways, everything indicated that something had happened. My heart raced. I ran to the teacher's lounge, but he wasn't there. It was then that I saw the coordinator calling me with a serious look. "Come with me." I swallowed hard, feeling dread take over me. She led me to the principal's office, where Gabriel sat with his head down. Beside him, the principal had a grim expression, and on the table, there was a cell phone. My blood ran cold. I knew exactly what that was. We received complaints, screenshots of messages. The principal's voice was cold, cutting. My vision blurred. Someone had found out. "This is serious," he continued. "There will be an investigation, and if confirmed, Professor Gabriel will be removed." My eyes met his, and my heart broke when I saw the look of defeat on his face. He held my hand under the table, a last silent gesture. But I knew, this time, there was no escape, and our forbidden tale was about to come to an end. The silence in the meeting room was deafening. My heart was beating so hard I could hear it in my ears, drowning out the principal's words, the disapproving looks, the suffocating presence of the coordinator, who watched me as if I were just a naive child who had made a mistake. But I knew it wasn't a mistake. Not for me. My gaze met Gabriel's, and in that instant, I saw everything we had tried to hide. The desire, the passion, the surrender. But above all, I saw the fear. He had already accepted the end. I hadn't. "That's it?" My voice was shaky but firm. The principal frowned. "What do you mean? Have you decided everything?" "The evidence speaks for itself." He pushed his cell phone onto the table. "Intimate messages, suspicious encounters. You know that this can have serious consequences, don't you?" I felt a lump in my throat, but I refused to lower my head. "And what will happen to him?" "Professor Gabriel will be removed from his position while we investigate the case. But, given the gravity of the situation, it is likely that he will lose his position." It was as if the air had been knocked out of my lungs. I thought there would be a way to fix it, but there wasn't. Gabriel slowly released my hand under the table, as if he were already saying goodbye. My body reacted before my mind could process it. I stood up suddenly, the chair creaking against the floor. "That's not fair." The coordinator gave me a warning look. "Sit down. Your behavior will only make the situation worse." "I love him." Those words escaped before I could contain them. The silence that followed was absolute. The director closed his eyes for a moment, as if he were exhausted by it. Gabriel, on the other hand, widened his eyes, his expression divided between surprise and despair. But it was true. I loved him. I had never said it out loud, but at that moment, faced with the chasm that was opening between us, I knew. He took a deep breath, and then, for the first time, he spoke. "Please, don't complicate things any further." His tone was calm, but there was a plea in his voice. And that was when I understood. He wouldn't fight for us. He was giving up. My eyes stung, but I refused to cry there. "Is it over then?" My voice came out lower than I wanted. Gabriel lowered his head. "Yes." That broke me into 1,000 pieces. The following week, he disappeared. He didn't come back to teach. His name was removed from the list of teachers. The comments in the hallways gradually died down, and soon, my name was no longer whispered in the corners. But inside me, everything still burned. I tried to find him. I called countless times, sent messages, all ignored. Until one day, when I went to his apartment, I discovered that he no longer lived there. He had left. No goodbyes, no explanations. That was when reality hit me with full force. I was just a mistake to him. I was the risk he wasn't willing to take. And as much as it hurt, as much as my heart still cried out for him, there was nothing more I could do. I lost him. And maybe, just maybe, he was never really mine.